So I'm Vajrashura, and for my talk for today I wanted to share some reflections I had after a study group the other day. So I was studying with Subhuti and a few order members, and he was talking about the nature of consciousness and how consciousness is primary, and how in agreement with, I guess, Western philosophy like Kant, like from Kant, time and space are just functions, you could say, of consciousness. But what he was saying in particular is that consciousness is always greater than being. And he was quoting from Sangharakshita in his classic book, The Three Jewels, who says, "Consciousness determines being, but being provides a ground for the further arising of consciousness." So consciousness determines being, but being provides a ground for the further arising of consciousness. So by consciousness here, I read him to mean the full breadth of our minds, the full potential of our minds, the full experience of our minds that we usually don't experience because we're so busy getting in the way of that experience. Yeah. And by being, I guess you could read, it's a bit of a looser term, I guess you could read ourselves as we experience ourselves within the limitations of this time and this place and this body and these circumstances. So what he's saying is there is something of consciousness which is not fully expressed, which is not fully determined, which is not fully limited or prescripted by the particular circumstances in our lives. There is always something greater in mind which can't be pinned down or explained by the circumstances we find ourselves in now and from our pasts. So, we talk a lot about working with our conditioning. We talk about the certain situations that have led ourselves to be here, that has shaped how we respond to things, and that's all very true and important to take on. But there is also something of consciousness that can never be pinned down by that. There is something of consciousness beyond the individual and immediate circumstances of our lives, beyond even the conditionings within this life and indeed previous lives. Sangharakshita talks about this elsewhere in his excellent lecture, Mind, Reactive and Creative, where he says, to paraphrase him slightly, the creative mind loves where there is no reason to love, is free where there is no reason to be free. And so there is something of our minds that no matter what the situation is around us, no matter what the circumstances are, there's a possibility for a deeper creativity of mind to come forth. Yeah. And at the same time, as Bhante says, as Sangharakshita says, being provides the ground for the further arising of consciousness. So that consciousness isn't independent of the being in this life. So we do need to, at the same time, work with our conditioning, work on ethics, work on providing as full an opportunity for the full flowering of consciousness as we can in the next arisings, in the next moments, in the next rebirths that we have, be they in this life or in the next life. And of course there are also the two dangers as well of eternalism and nihilism. So nihilism would be thinking that we are purely the result of our conditioning, and it would deny then by implication the fact that there is this, unpinned downable aspect of mind that can always manifest and that can always be creative. Which also means that nobody is irredeemable. There is always the possibility of someone being creative and skillful, no matter what their conditioning is. And also there's always the possibility of connecting with someone at that level, no matter how opposed to our views they are, or no matter what their take on the world is. There is always the possibility of connecting with someone at that deeper, more creative level. So we need to watch out for the nihilistic take on it, which is that we're purely a result of our conditioning. And then we also need to look out for the eternalistic take on it, which is that our true being is independent, our true consciousness, is completely independent of the being, is independent of the situations that we find ourselves in the world. So we need ethics, we need kindness, we need awareness, because how we are in the world, our being right now, shapes the full flowering of our consciousness in the future. So anyways, I thought it was a really interesting point to bring out, and I think it is, as I said, very relevant at the moment, because no matter what our conditioning is, no matter what our social conditioning is, our racial conditioning is, our societal conditioning is, there is always the possibility of connecting with someone at a deeper, more creative level, no matter how bad we experience them as being, or no matter how good we experience them as being. There's always the possibility of connecting at a human level. There's something of that deeper consciousness in us connecting with that something of the deeper consciousness in them. So I'll finish by reading the quote from Sangharakshita again. Consciousness determines being, but being provides a ground for the further arising of consciousness. And to quote Subhuti again, consciousness is always greater than being.